All right, excellent. Well, welcome everyone. And just kind of to recap, before we go into our presentation, if anyone's having any Zoom issues or challenges, feel free to use the chat to address those and we can try to get you some help. You are more than welcome to have your video on, but certainly you can keep that off too. And then we'll keep everyone on mute for now, but we will be having a live Q&A panel. And I certainly want people to feel comfortable to come off that, because that was why we kept the meeting format in Zoom today, is so that we actually could have an open discussion. So we certainly want to hear from you all. With that too, we also have this being recorded, so you'll be able to view it later or share it with colleagues, but just want to be mindful of that. So I'll get started with an introduction. My name is Ashley McFarland, and I am the Executive Director of Dovetail Partners. And we are an environmental nonprofit based in Minnesota, but doing work throughout the US and beyond, and very excited about forest carbon opportunities. And that's a big part of our portfolio right now. We've got other people from our project team here today that you'll eventually meet through the presentation. But I just wanted to note that this project is funded through the Natural Climate Solutions Accelerator grant, which is a grant program funded through the Doris Duke Foundation via the Nature Conservancy. And so we have wonderful partners at TNC, and then of course in all the states that we're working with right now, but just really appreciate folks coming today to learn more about this project. And the real emphasis today, despite us being in Minnesota, the project team, and a bulk of this project being in Minnesota, one of our main goals is to actually be able to leverage what we're learning and scale up to other states across the country, specifically those states with state trust lands. And so I know some states that's school trust lands, some it's just state trust lands, but that is essentially what we're here to discuss today. And I just want to turn it over just briefly to Aaron Vanderland, who is our local in Minnesota State Trust Land Manager, just to give you a welcome. And I know many of you probably know Aaron already.
Thanks, Ashley. Good afternoon, everyone. I've met a number of you. I recognize some names. I haven't met some others, though. So again, as Ashley said, thanks for joining us to learn more about this project. We provided a brief overview of the project during the January virtual meeting for the National Association of State Trust Lands, and promised at that time that we would come back later once we had some data and some more things to talk about. And that is why we're here today. So we really appreciate your time. Quick purpose statement for me. And this is for the National Association of State Trust Lands. And my view on the purpose is that the member states exchange management processes or management tactics on state trust lands to further our fiduciary responsibilities and generate revenue off those lands. To that end, last year, the association passed a resolution at its summer conference, resolution 2020-3, that looked to advance climate solutions on working forest lands. And that is exactly what we're looking to do with this project. So appreciate the partnerships that I have with Dovetail Partners and TNC, as well as the DNR Resource Assessment Shop, who have been instrumental. We also have another partner, NRI. It's a local, or it's a Minnesota-based organization that's affiliated with the University of Minnesota. And they're looking at this from the small landowner scale as well. So we're trying to utilize the forest in Minnesota across the different landscapes and ownership. So with that, I'll turn it back to Ashley. Thank you again for your time. I appreciate it. And I think I'm on the panel later for questions. So
you sure are, so don't go anywhere.
I won't.
Yeah, no, this is excellent. And really, I just want to reinforce that we want you here today to help inform this project and also to make the connections needed, because we do want to replicate some of the work we're doing in each of your states. And so we want to make sure we make connections so that we can share data, share methodology and processes, so that at the end of our project, which is about at the halfway mark now, we want to be able to show that this work can be extrapolated out beyond Minnesota. So we do really appreciate your engagement today for that reason. So I am going to go ahead and share my screen right now and then just share a presentation that we have prepared, especially for those of you that may not have been on that initial NASTL call. I just wanted to provide a little bit of overview of what this project is and maybe what it's not, just to give you all just a bit of better context before we go into our Q&A panel. So with that, I'll go ahead and launch off. Many of our partners were already mentioned along with our funding, but I just wanted to recognize all of them today because this truly has been a very collaborative process and really appreciate all of their contributions. So I am not going to go through and actually do a formal introduction where everybody comes off mute because I think that might take up the whole hour with the great turnout that we had today. So if you are able, we just would love to be able to mark and know that you were here with us. So then too, we can reach back out potentially. Please just go ahead and put your name in there and the state you represent. And then also, if you have done any work with forest carbon in your state, opportunities maybe for those state trust lands to access that, feel free to drop that in. And maybe even there's some major challenges that you recognize. Hopefully we're going to dive into that a little bit later, but if you want to drop that in there as well, we'd love to record some of those things. So just a quick overview of the project objectives. So really we've got 3 stages to this. And stage 1 is really just looking at how we can develop and then deploy methods across our Minnesota school trust lands to identify what we're calling opportunity areas for carbon project development. And so initially going into this project, we were really focused on how could we identify some shovel-ready projects that would allow us to tap into kind of the emerging carbon market world. And we recognize that there's certainly some complexities there because we are talking about public lands. And there's a lot of discussion, whether or not public lands should really be a part of that. But we certainly want to just know what the potential is in Minnesota. So if given that opportunity, we would be ready for that. We have 1.5 million acres total in Minnesota that we can assess. And what we're trying to do is identify 1 to 3 projects, kind of vague there just because we're still kind of working through the data and trying to understand what's out there. But looking at projects at fairly large scale, potentially upwards of 20,000 acres each. We certainly won't be able to run these projects completely through the carbon market kind of scenario by the time we're done with the project. However, we want them ready so that if given the opportunity, they would be there. The next step, and the one that we really want to focus on today with you all, is to conduct a national opportunity assessment. So actually trying to work with states to access data and just have a better understanding of kind of the workings at your level of how we can maybe extrapolate this work out and then determine what potential is out there. Initially in our project, we identified 9 states that we were hoping to work with that came to a cumulative over 10 million acres of trust land. And so that's just really exciting thinking about running some of these methods across really large data sets, and you'll learn a little bit more about how we're doing that. But we truly want you engaged in that process so that we can hopefully bring you in on this project. And then finally, because there's certainly other opportunities beyond just carbon out there right now, specifically looking at ecosystem service markets, we're also wanting to do an assessment of what those opportunities look like elsewhere. So there will be a white paper at the end of this project outlining what those are. So I won't belabor too much in talking about the models and the data. We actually have some initial data from Minnesota that we want to share with you all. But essentially, I just want you to think about kind of the flow process that we're using, and then try to think about in your state how you could be engaged in this and maybe what data layers you have that you could contribute to these efforts. Because as I said before, this is really just a pilot project in Minnesota to really test out these methodologies, but then hopefully we'll be able to scale up throughout the country. So first we start with the field data, and oftentimes at the more national scale, we're thinking about FIA data. But then within Minnesota, we also have our DNR plot-based inventory, or PBIs. And so we're using those as kind of an input. And likely in your state, you've got a different input potential. And then we're going to layer on the remotely sensed data. So looking at satellite and aerial imagery. And then for those areas that we actually have LiDAR, being able to integrate that as well. And then utilizing some open source software options, taking a combination of Google Earth Engine and then Fusion and R to kind of throw everything together and make the magic happen so that we can have these opportunity areas identified. And so this is essentially the flow that we're doing right now in Minnesota. But what I want to point out is that we know that not every state is going to have the same level of data in all areas. And so we want to recognize that and make sure, though, that whatever methodologies we're putting forth are nimble and can be used in other areas. And so what we did is developed 3 essentially standards for these models. And you can think of them as gold, silver, and bronze. And many of you can probably link that bronze is probably lower level quality of data, or maybe coverage or even resolution of that data. And then moving up through the ranks all the way up to gold, where we have kind of that more precise, fine-tuned, high resolution data. And as we work through this, we'll also be assessing which methodology really is, we think, capturing that best opportunity assessment. And so do not think that you necessarily have to have LiDAR coverage across your entire area or even state reference plots to be involved in this, because there's certainly different points of entry for all the different states, and we want folks to be involved, whether it be a gold, silver, or bronze level. And at the bottom there, we also talk about the temporal nature of the analysis, so how often things are being updated. And so we really do want to simulate the different options that might present themselves in each state you represent. So at the end, these opportunity assessments, really what we're looking at is developing these methods to assess the carbon stocks on state trust lands, which will hopefully then aid in the understanding of the carbon stock potential across the landscape. And then that will play a key role in the prioritization and selection for future site level forest management, hopefully designed to enhance carbon storage over time. So that's essentially really the goal and workings of this project. We have some different objectives to get there, but that's essentially what we're trying to do at the end of the day is, if given the opportunity to tap into this carbon market, how can we prioritize and identify what opportunities are out there? So next, I'm actually going to turn it over to Jennifer Corcoran, who is with the DNR, our Minnesota Department of Natural Resources Resource Assessment Program. And they are the ones that we have contracted to actually do all of the data crunching for us. And just note that we recognize that these are all Minnesota examples, and many of you are joining us from elsewhere. But we do want you all to know that we're very aware of that, and that we are trying to make these models work for everyone everywhere. So bear with us as we kind of share some of our preliminary findings here, with the hopes then that you can find how that you could potentially slot into this. And so Jennifer, with that, go ahead and I will just move through the slides for you on your call, okay?
Sounds good, Ashley. Is my audio working okay? Great. Thank you for having me. As Ashley mentioned, I'm Jennifer Corcoran, and I work for the Resource Assessment Office in the Department of Natural Resources Division of Forestry in Minnesota. I do a lot of project management work, and I'm the lead of this project for our team, but I am not alone here. And with us today, we also have Scott Hillard, and behind the scenes, we also have Dr. Ram Dale, as well as Luke Spady, who work on the various elements of this project. This slide right here, I just wanted to share with you, first of all, shows kind of an example of the work that we're doing hosted in a Google Earth Engine platform. Everything we're doing in this project by design is to be able to meet the lowest common denominator of available data across the nation. And so the results I'll show you today are just basically screenshots of that platform that is right now live. Ashley, next slide, please. So I'm going to zoom in on a couple spots just to showcase for you, what does it mean, what does it look like when we talk about models that are gold, bronze, or silver? what do these different model levels and their accuracies look like when you see them side by side or flip through them? We're going to look at an area that we have the greatest data convergence in Cass County, Minnesota, where there's several dates of LiDAR and imagery available. So I'll showcase these areas that are boxed here in red, as well as a pixel that I have clicked that's there indicated with a star. Go ahead with the next slide. So here I'm just showing you some of the results of our forest carbon model, zoomed in on a school trust parcel over there on the west side of that example. If you go to the next slide, there's another example where we zoom in on that, and you can see the variability across this parcel in our modeled estimate. And if we go to the next one, I've clicked on a pixel here, and here's where I'm indicating with you that there's actually a few layers stacked up here where now we have different results where we can compare. So the two examples you just saw were just one of those models, incidentally the silver model. Looking at this pixel, we can see that we have different values across these different models, and we can click anywhere in here and see how these models differ to better understand at that very fine scale the differences that the methods you use actually result in your estimate of forest carbon. Go ahead to the next slide. So we're going to pick on an area that's kind of there in the middle of the block I was showing you on the beginning slide, zooming in on this conglomerate of stands that there are mixed trust land stands as well as other acquired stands. Here you see the bronze model where we're using imagery only, and we're also using fuzzed or not true locations of FIA plots in order to drive the model. If you go to the next slide, you can see how that model gets further resolved or looks like it does when you add the true FIA plot locations. So fuzzed plot locations, which are free and available to all, do result in a model estimate, but when you add the true plot locations, you can see that it's starting to better capture the different kinds of actual conditions in this area. Go to the next slide. When you add LiDAR to that mix, this is what results. This is our silver model where we're using satellite imagery. We're also using LiDAR-based height metrics and the true FIA plot locations. Having height included in your model is key to estimating carbon with better accuracy and tighter confidence. However, things can change on the landscape over time, and when you have new LiDAR data, as in the next slide, we can do even more. This is our gold model, and it's actually using high density LiDAR. We now have 2 LiDAR dates. We can look at change over time in this area, but what we can also see with high density LiDAR is when you zoom in, these features are resolved with even greater detail. And if you go to the next slide, Scott is going to talk about how we can look at these estimates in the sense of their error or confidence across the stand.
Thanks, Jennifer. Hi, everyone. I'm Scott Hillard. I'm the forest biometrician through the resource assessment program. So yeah, like Jennifer was basically showing how we're basically achieving greater resolution on some of the metrics that are important to us. In particular, to compare across all these different models, we really looked at above ground biomass as well as the below ground component. We left out, obviously, we left out some of the other pools, mainly because we have the data to look at above and below ground for all the different data sets. So that's kind of one of the choices that we made in terms of making those comparisons. What we're basically, so as Jennifer showed, you basically have these models that are improving. I think one of the things I typically get called in to do is then say, well, how good are these models, and what are some of the issues, and can we identify those? So what you're seeing here on the left is basically the gold model that shows the above ground carbon for this area. And then on the right side, what you're seeing is an estimate of the 90% confidence interval for that prediction from the model. And so we're basically able to start looking at where our predictions maybe we have less confidence in our predictions. And the pattern that we're kind of noticing, at least in this area, is that they tend to happen in areas where we have maybe low biomass. If you can go to the next slide. So for example, on the left, you see a stand which has a very high amount of biomass. That corresponds to a much higher amount of confidence in that estimate. But of course, you can see those areas where there's maybe like a pond or something in the middle. And that's where we tend to see these models not perform as well. But all this information is basically leading to the point where we can not only provide an estimate of what's out there, but also how much you should maybe trust that. And should you maybe do some more investigation if you were going to invest your time and resources into that particular area. If you go to the next slide. So some of the products that we're trying to basically get out of this in the very end is basically saying not only here is an estimate of biomass using different techniques, but also how good are those estimates, and how can you trust them. So finally, we want to make these comparisons between models, not to necessarily say that you can't use any of these other techniques, but just to be clear and be very upfront about the warts and all aspects of these different models. So for example, we can look at sort of that gain in precision you're getting in terms of the model estimates from different models. So here we see the gold models contrasted in the same areas over the same stands with the silver models. And you can see quite a bit of gain when you're able to invest in LiDAR as well as a custom plot network. Obviously, that's not totally feasible for everybody, but this is the kind of information that we want to provide so that if you were ever interested in pursuing something like that, you would have the evidence to then take that to your legislators or whoever else to maybe ask for that that investment in terms of trying to gain more precision in your estimates for these types of projects.
Thank you, Scott. So I think that it may be safe to say the bronze model, if it were on that bar chart, would be probably off the chart. That the confidence intervals are pretty wide for that model. And so the take home here is just that the more high precision information we input into this model, the tighter those bars become. If you go to the next slide, that said, we know that we can start with the bronze model and go from there and actually use it as a foundation to improve upon. There are several things that we have also tested, and that's, which imagery do you use, what times of the year, what ranges of time, and what indices are input. So when we look at the lowest common denominator, we will look at things that are normalized across a wide region so that it's somewhat stable. But what that also does is make it somewhat generic. And so it does need some improvement. What we have done is started to, again, build that foundation in Google Earth Engine. And we have begun to populate the bronze model for every state in the nation and using fuzzed FIA locations. And so we're well on our way to beginning relationships with at least some of our 9 identified states and look at what could be the next steps from here. And with that, I'll turn it back over to Ashley.
Thank you very much. All right, so we are actually going to dive into our Q&A panel now. And I'm going to actually stop sharing my screen here in a bit, but I did just want to introduce the folks that are going to be fielding questions and just also wanted to recognize that we've got some other people in the room with us as well. So as I said before, I represent Dovetail Partners, but I also have my colleague, President and CEO of Dovetail Partners, Catherine Fernholz, with us today. And then we also have our partner, Meredith Cornett, who hasn't spoke yet, but she's going to be on the panel with us. And so we're just going to kind of broadly open it up, but I just wanted to make sure everyone knew kind of who is with us in the room. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and stop my share. And having Aaron and Meredith and Scott kind of lead this. The first thing I want to do is just kind of break the ice a little bit for this panel and have Aaron, Jennifer, or Aaron, Scott, and Meredith all talk about just why are they excited about this project? Why is this something they wanted to participate in? Just kind of brief background about, why this is important for Minnesota.
Did you want me to start, Ashley?
Yeah, why don't we go do that? We'll just Aaron,
Okay.
Meredith, and then Scott. Thank you.
Sure. I think the reason why I'm excited about this project is pretty straightforward. In 2013, I led an interdisciplinary team that inventoried all of Minnesota's 2.5 million acres of school trust lands. The 1.5 million that Ashley referenced earlier is what we considered forested school trust lands in Minnesota. But that inventory from 2013 identified that roughly 800,000 acres were uneconomic in Minnesota, which made me really think about, okay, why do we have these lands in our portfolio and are they uneconomic? What we came to find out is that they actually do provide value. They provide ecosystem services values, and there are markets for those. And so we actually worked on, well, this is our second proposal, right? Our first proposal was not accepted. They asked us to modify it a little bit. We modified it and are looking at this. So really what this is doing for Minnesota's forested school trust lands, from my standpoint, is providing another revenue opportunity on what could be marginal school trust lands or low productive school trust lands. I don't know how many of you know this or not, but Minnesota's seen a downturn in its timber industry due to some mill closures and things of that nature. We also have some insect and disease problems and some low marketability tree species that we could probably get some more revenue out of if we had a different opportunity. And then I also look at this as it's a win-win. We would be protecting Minnesota's forest lands, providing some conservation benefits to Minnesota in general, as well as producing revenue for the school trust. So that's why I'm excited about it. It's a new revenue stream, in short.
Thank you. Now, Meredith.
Well, everything that Aaron just said, we're excited about that too. So just to put that out there. But the Nature Conservancy's mission is to protect the lands and waters on which all life depends. And at our core, we've been a biodiversity organization, very interested in working lands for people and for nature. And we're also very intent on solving the climate crisis. So we have been zeroing in on this piece of climate solutions that we call natural climate solutions. And that's just the ability of our natural ecosystems, natural and working lands, and different land management practices that we can do that really help to draw down carbon dioxide from the atmosphere, basically using the out-of-the-box technology of photosynthesis. So we love that. We see that potential, and it can actually provide something like 1/3 of the emissions drawdown that we need globally. And sort of bringing that to the US and zeroing in on a state like Minnesota with our forest resources and the outsized potential of forests to do that drawdown is really, really powerful. So that is one of our big interests in this project and why we were so interested in partnering on it and supporting it. And just recognizing that that there are multiple streams, multiple values that can come out of any acre of land, carbon being one of them. So we're super excited. And I guess the last thing I'll say is that for us, thinking about the possibility of price on carbon and being able to market credits potentially for the benefit of school trust lands and the school trust, that's really important. And at the same time, one of the ways that we've started thinking about markets within our organization is really that it's an opportunity to scale a lot of the work that we think is so important. So I'll leave it at that, and we can pass it on to Scott.
Yeah, and Scott, I know that you have a much different perspective on this. So I don't mean to put you on the spot with this question, but I'd love to hear your response.
Well, one of the nice parts about going last is that everyone kind of says all the reasons that you basically share. So that make it nice and short. Basically, the only thing I'd add really to this is that forestry as a discipline is really evolving, and the fact that we're really starting to move towards a remotely sensed world. Everyone kind of says big data and all that, but it's really true. There's an amazing amount of information coming in, and to be kind of in the DNR at a time when it's finally being recognized that we can use that information, that we should be using that information, I think it's, for me, and I think just the DNR generally, it's a pretty tremendous opportunity to start basically leveraging all this information, as well as basically, sort of being an incubation think tank around how we leverage all this data to really provide valuable insights that have not only ecological consequences, but also direct monetary consequences as well. Because again, we're here to manage land. And the fact is we're not getting more money to do this work. So basically leveraging all this information we have and really squeezing the most insight out of it is just super exciting. So for me, that's kind of why I like being part of this project.
Excellent. Thank you for your response. Now I want to open it up to all of our attendees today. Feel free to either take yourself off mute or drop something in the chat box, but we want you to start asking questions. So let's stump the panel essentially, because what we want to do is we want to figure out what do we need to do next? How can we move this forward? And so we want to hear from all you. So feel free to start chiming in.
Hey, Scott, this is Mark Slayton. And just a question for you. Are you familiar with the JEDI LiDAR program on the space station?
I am familiar with the JEDI program. I mean, how could you not be with an awesome name like that? So
I know, isn't that cool? But out of curiosity, just with the returns coming in from JEDI, would that kind of bump from the bronze to the silver class just with that level of data?
It's interesting, and unfortunately, I couldn't speak very intelligently about the sort of things you'd be getting out of that. I think one of the things about JEDI is it's often flown in strips, whereas a lot of the silver models that we have are basically wall-to-wall. It's low density, but it is wall-to-wall LiDAR. Some of the really interesting work that I've seen coming out of utilizing stripped LiDAR is how the FIA program used that up in Alaska. So, you sort of fly LiDAR over where you have FIA plots, and then, you have basically 3 levels of data. So you have the LiDAR, you have Landsat, and then you have plot data. So there's like 3-level estimators and things like that. There's some really interesting work around that. But in terms of being able to directly bump up to what we have in terms of a silver product, I'm not sure. Just because of the nature of the JEDI LiDAR, but it's only because we haven't looked into it a whole lot. So we'll see how that kind of evolves.
This is Wynn Menifee from Alaska. I have a couple of questions. In the first slide, you're talking about exploring other ecosystem market opportunities and things like that. But most of the presentation here has been about gathering data. So when we look at the markets and the restrictions, obviously you could go to private markets or the California market. How much of your study or project will be focusing on the restrictions and such in the changing California market and the availability to actually sell these carbon credits when it comes to that time? So I'll ask my second question after we get through with that.
And I can actually jump in on that one. So one of the things that's identified in our project scope, and I didn't belabor it here on this because I knew people would be mostly interested about the data and how we're running these models. But what we will be doing is developing actually fact sheets for each state and working with people at the state level to identify what those policy challenges are. And actually a result of this project is to develop some recommendations on what things need to be done to move this forward. Because we fully recognize that it's not a level playing field across all states and that there's plenty of challenges and barriers still in our way, even in Minnesota. So that is an element of this. And then just to touch on the ecosystem service market piece a little bit more, that was actually something that the Climate Solutions Accelerator grant asked us to do. It wasn't a part of our initial proposal, and primarily for the reason you said, like, we can't assume the carbon market opportunity is going to be there. So given that, and all this great work we could still do, what's plan B, right? So how could we maybe take this knowledge we've gained and enter a different market space? And so that's where the ecosystem service market came in. And really that white paper is just going to do kind of a brief overview of what that could look like. We won't be taking a deep dive as much as we did with the carbon opportunity, but does that answer your question a little bit, Wynn?
Yes, it does. Thank you. And so the other aspect of that is sort of along the same line is Alaska is well endowed with muskeg and bogs, peat bogs and such. And I haven't seen it yet, but is anybody, I think Minnesota has plenty of bogs too. So is there any exploration of not just trees in the carbon potential, but muskegs and such like that? I've been searching for it. I have not found the market niche, but it's just one of those things. Since we have so much in Alaska, I would love to see how we could potentially market it other than wetlands credit, wetlands offset mitigation for the Corps of Engineers.
So, oh, you want to go ahead, Aaron, and then
Yeah,
I'll
I'll just jump in real quick. When we do have a considerable amount of peatlands in Minnesota, most of them are already protected. But with regard to the market aspect of it, I have a call on Monday with a Columbia University PhD who is actually studying the peatland carbon market. So I will have more information on that. And once I get some information, I'll share it with you.
Great, thank you.
We'd be really interested in that too, Aaron. So the Nature Conservancy right now, just given the vast peatlands in northern Minnesota, is putting together an assessment of the peatlands that may historically have been drained. We have a pretty extensive, often abandoned ditch system so we've got some oxidation going on, some release of carbon to the atmosphere for ditches that are not necessarily serving an agricultural, for example, purpose anymore. And so there is actually a new methodology on the voluntary market under the VERA standards, the VCS, for temperate peatlands and re-wetting in order to try to keep that carbon out of the atmosphere. And so that's a tool that we'll be exploring, and I'll actually drop it into the chat here in a moment.
Scott, did you have anything to add from just a data standpoint?
I think I've seen I've seen some very interesting work coming out in terms of trying to model peatland carbon and things like that through multispectral or through hyperspectral imagery. Sorry, and some of that work was being done at Michigan Tech University while I was there, and so I don't know how many papers came out about it. But that being said, we've often thought about, the sort of things that we can expand our modeling into. Right now, we're really dealing with above ground carbon because we want to do these model comparisons. But, we do collect quite a bit of information about additional pools. And certainly with, Minnesota's wealth of peat resources, I think this is going to be a fruitful area, even for resource assessment into the future, because I know there's a lot of increased interest in this. So yeah, there's definitely some things to be solved there, but I think, as we go forward, there might be some interesting opportunities to explore how to make predictions about peatland carbon.
Excellent. And I'm going to just chime in with a question from our chat. So Doug Kennedy from Washington DNR asks, in the case of the Minnesota project, there was a mention of uneconomical ground. That's a term that Aaron was using. So in those cases, does additionality come from the avoided conversion? And another way to ask that is, does the revenue generated from carbon credits and potentially the ecosystem service credits enable Minnesota DNR to push back against pressure to sell off non-earning forest lands? I'm guessing, Aaron, you might be best to answer this one.
Yeah, I can feel that one. I would say generally there is not a push in Minnesota right now to sell off non-earning forested lands. So I think the answer to your question is simply yes. If you want some more information, Doug, I can talk to you offline about what we're working on with some of these lands. But simple answer is yes. We really don't have a pressure to sell the lands right now.
Thanks.
There was a question above that too, Ashley.
Yes.
Can't get there.
Here, what is the potential for estimating carbon flux over time via the models described? And what would be required to achieve this goal? So the data and the reanalysis. David Wilson asked that question.
Yeah.
Oh, that's a Scott question. That's not for me.
Mhm.
No, and that might even be a good David question too. No, actually, I think you have to probably think first about which model type you'd want to use. Things you understand about maybe the error of those models. So which one would maybe best serve your purposes? Again, we're mainly talking about above and below ground right now. Again, that could be expanded with the right information. So in terms of estimating the flux, obviously just establishing a baseline, picking a modeling strategy that you feel not only provides the right resolution, but also the right precision in terms of just the confidence we have in the estimates coming out of it. And then as long as you sort of say, okay, we're going to start from here, and then basically just kind of roll that forward. There's probably a lot of opportunity there to basically try to model it directly, as well as maybe calibrate some models based on some interesting input data from maybe harvest or something like that. So I think there's a lot of opportunity to use the right model. And again, that's kind of why we're trying to provide a lot of the
It sounds like Scott might have dropped off there. All right. Hopefully he'll come back to us. Okay. Just for the sake of moving forward, are you guys still able to hear me okay?
I can hear you fine. You just freeze every now and then, Ashley. That's all.
Okay. Okay. Maybe it's because of that temperature outside today. All right. So I did want to was there any follow-up for Scott there?
crickets.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, I think Ashley's having trouble. Let me step in. Sorry about that. Yeah, so I'm Katie Fernholz with Dovetail Partners, and happy to be here. And so let's just keep working through these questions. And Ashley, just raise your hand if you feel like your internet's more stable. So there was a question just on the timing of the white paper that Ashley mentioned, and that's a final deliverable on the project. So we're not going to promise anything before the end of the project, and the project scheduled, if my memory holds, to go through like January of 2022. Is that about right, Meredith? So yeah, I know better than to promise that I'm going to meet deadlines. So stay tuned. But as soon as those of you, I mean, Dovetail has a monthly newsletter that we put out. You go to the Dovetail Partners website. That's a good way to keep track of anything. But otherwise, mark your calendar, stay tuned. Less than a year from now, for sure, we'll have those final deliverables. So good. Thanks for that detailed question.
And I'll make sure to distribute it to all the NASTL member states.
Okay. Exactly. It'll be public. I mean, you know what I mean? There's nothing we'll keep to ourselves on that. So, and Meredith, thank you for sharing the methodology for those that want to get into the details. And any meeting where we talk about muskegs is a good meeting. I got a soft spot for muskegs and peatlands. But Karen had a comment in here, Aaron, around related to this pressure of selling the land or selling timber from these lands. I don't know Aaron, if you wanted to have any comments on the additionality around silviculture and productivity management. Do you see that question, Aaron?
Yeah, I do. And, you know, I think can I pass to Scott on this one? I don't know that there's a difference, but I could be wrong.
Good. Scott, any comments on that one?
Let's see. You know, certainly I think that would be part of maybe a carbon credit program. You can identify areas that are maybe understocked and things like that. And right, maybe there's a silvicultural intervention that can be done. Maybe, you know, maybe the site isn't growing what it's optimal to grow right now. It could maybe have a plantation of something else. You know, there's a lot of talk around afforestation and things like that. And that's maybe one of the parts of this project that you could do is identify lands that are maybe understocked. And again, from the carbon models alone, you probably couldn't tell a lot of that, but maybe combining this information with, you know, soils information or something else can actually probably provide the sort of insights that you would need to drive selecting those sites for these kind of projects. So again, I think one of the nice things about this is if you have the right minds on it, you see the data you have available, and then you start to think about how I can pull these other pieces together to maybe do some of these more interesting projects. Because again, there's that whole thing of, you know, well, maybe we're just going to defer, but then again, land improvement should be a big part of this as well. So I agree, and I think that's probably something that could come out of these types of projects.
Absolutely, because yeah, that's the nature of land management. There's no one thing. It's knowing that land and then looking at all your options. I like that, Scott. I think the next question, Scott, would also be for you from Amanda about the quality of the data, the bronze, silver, gold, you know, and how that impacts the economic return. And do you see that question, Scott, in the chat?
I do.
Please, go ahead.
So it's a really interesting question, and I would kind of maybe differentiate using the models as a decision tool versus using them solely to basically drive investment. You know, if that's the case, I usually a lot of times, you know, I talk about forest inventory in terms of data that is investment grade. And I usually use that term to refer to data that has some sort of error associated with it, so you know your risk. The things that I kind of see coming out of this is, you know, trying to basically identify the quality, maybe not so much that you're going to make a direct investment based on that data in terms of just, you know, I'm going to shell out money because I see this. But again, you could also think of that in terms of where am I going to select my projects based on that, which I guess is another form of investment. And in that case, you're going to take on a lot more risk by using these different levels of models, right? Bronze would be the most risky, silver would be less risky, followed by gold would probably be the gold standard of, you know, reducing your risk in terms of selecting your sites for projects. Again, one of the things I would kind of think about is using this as a triage tool to pick from a selection of sites. Because again, we all know that, you know, maybe a model is biased for a particular small area, or maybe doesn't give a very good estimate for a variety of reasons. Again, it's all based on the data you put into it. But it could at least help sort of whittle down your selection, so you're not wasting a lot of time going to sites that maybe wouldn't be as fruitful. And again, depending on what sorts of interventions you want to do. Are we setting aside carbon? Are we identifying understocked lands? There's a lot of different things you can do here. But of course, in all of those cases, you're reducing the risk of your time, the investment of your time, and therefore money, as you move down this chain in terms of models. But again, you have to use what's available to you. So you don't want to just not do work because you're like, oh, I don't have gold. It's like, look, you can still ride, you can still, you know, do a triathlon on a Huffy. You don't need, you know, you don't need like a Schwinn or a Surly, right? So just get started, and there's a sort of an option at each one of those levels. But again, yeah, you're going to reduce your risk the most by using a gold level model.
And you know, one thing I'm picking up in that, Scott, and please correct me, you know, other team members, but I think what I'm hearing in part of that is, you know, this is really an assessment process to prioritize where you then would go to the next steps. Nothing in this model, as I would represent it, is sufficient for like full project development and meeting the protocols and everything that's required to be able to sell offsets. This is really an assessment to prioritize and then figure out where it's worth that further effort. Is it, Meredith, I see you nodding. Is that a fair representation? That it's an important distinction, I think, because going to market is a whole nother hurdle of, yeah, go ahead, Meredith.
Yeah, I just, everything that you and Scott said, that's exactly kind of what my response was. And just thinking about as vast an area as school trust forest lands, it's just not feasible to do a detailed assessment of that whole area. So figuring out what's most promising, and then knowing that that next step often is to engage a carbon project developer who will then ensure that all of the guidelines are being followed to assess the potential of this project and then market the credits. That's a huge investment. So.
Yep. And we're trying to make that, if you're going to go that far, do it with confidence based upon some due diligence, those kinds of things. Absolutely. Excellent. Good. Well, Ashley, let's see does it seem like your situation?
Yeah, am I back? I'm not sure. Can you guys hear me okay? Okay. We had some significant power outages over the night because of a winter storm. And so things have been a little sketchy today. So hopefully I'm back now, and apologies for that. Please, if you still have questions, either come off mute, raise your hand, or drop them in the chat. And if we don't get them all addressed today, we will make sure our team does respond. So feel free to dump things in that chat right now. But I do want to just throw out to everyone attending today is, do you see opportunities in your state for this kind of work? Does this excite you? Would you like to be involved? And obviously there's no commitments requested of you today, but we really just want to know what states might be interested in working through this with us. So once again, if you want to come off mute or just drop in the chat, we'd love to hear from you.
Hey everyone, this is Mark Slayton again, and I'm honestly just fairly ignorant on this. This is kind of new and exciting to me, but what kind of revenue are we talking about? Just ballpark, by ton, by acre, etc. What are we thinking?
So I can say right now that on the voluntary market, because it's all over the place, but credits are selling for about $10 a ton of carbon. And the amount you're realizing per acre really depends on the site and the practice. But yeah, we're talking bulk sales here. So it probably wouldn't be worth doing this on an acre. In Minnesota, to bring something up to a financial scale where it actually, the numbers would pencil out, you probably want to do 20,000 acres. Aaron, I saw you maybe about to jump in on that.
No, I wasn't. Go ahead.
So I think generally estimates that I've seen, Katie, maybe you wait.
I think you're absolutely right. I mean, it felt like we spent 20 plus years in the $5 per ton market. It's ticked up where people are now confident saying $20 a ton. There are projections by the end of this decade that we'll be hitting $30 a ton. So there is kind of, a lot of speculation and different things going on in the market. And as Meredith said, there's high variability between voluntary markets, regulatory markets. There's different things going on. We are starting to see some of the new project developers put some numbers out in public, so if you do a little research, you can see some of those promises being made. But yeah, like Meredith said, the credits you'll have available from your acreage will make a difference. But there are a lot of people thinking that $10 to $30 per ton marketplace is going to open up, making this a lot more feasible for a lot more forest types, management options, and scale of projects.
Mm-hmm. I think the number I saw in the California market most recently was they set a floor at $17.70 a ton.
I want to just recognize, Doug, thank you for your comment about Washington DNR being potentially interested, and it's very exciting to hear that you guys maybe have some projects in the works. There was a question, and I just want to make sure I understand fully. Jim asked, are the 3 models, gold, silver, bronze, available to us, the general public? And specifically, are you just asking, are the methodologies going to be available? Because if that's the case, then yes. The whole purpose of this work was to be able to develop methodologies that then other people could use. Jim, please let me know though if that was not the intent of your question, or if there was some additional kind of background there that you needed some clarification on. Okay. And then Karen made a comment, what about RGGI or California? anyone able to address that? I personally don't have any feedback for that one.
I don't either.
You mean yeah, so the California regulatory market, you're asking about price, Karen? Price per ton?
Okay.
Okay. Yeah, so I did hit on that. I didn't talk about RGGI, the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative. That's, I think, the New England market. And I know less about that one. Katie, do you know anything about?
Nothing current, nothing that's up to date.
All right. So as we wrap up here at the top of the hour, really the next piece is how do you get involved as a state? And Wynn, I just saw you come off. Do you have anything to add before I jump into that?
Yeah, I had a follow-up question to the California thing. Is that the California market, when we've been exploring that, we've run into a situation where they don't deem trust lands as being state lands. They deem them as being state lands, not private lands. Therefore, there's the native corporations up here have no problems at all doing carbon projects. They're well accepted in the the California regulatory market, but as a state entity, we're in a different game where they don't want to give us the same type of benefits. So I was wondering if other trusts have had that challenge of inserting into the California market or elsewhere because you're a state entity.
Yeah, when what you're talking about is the California regulatory market deems those state lands where we might see them as trust lands as privately held, they see them as public. They consider them already protected. That's the issue, is that you're already getting some conservation protection from the state managing those lands. So,
which is interesting, because when you try to prove to them that in fact, oh, we're going to cut that, or we're going to do X, Y, and Z, they don't lift that the concern that you're not private.
Yeah. Exactly. That I think for my standpoint, and I don't speak for anybody else, but I think we need a boutique market for carbon credits for other groups, so that nobody has to, or everybody doesn't have to go to the voluntary market because they can't access the regulatory market. And the prices are, I think, Meredith, what did you say? It was like $18 a metric ton, and then the regulatory market, and then the voluntary markets in the 7 or 8 range. Is that right? 10 maybe?
I think 10 is the average. Yeah.
Yep.
And this could all change overnight if we end up with a national price on carbon.
Excellent. Well, I'm going to conclude the panel there, and I know that there's probably a lot more questions that you all have in the audience, and just starting to kind of maybe think about some of these elements as they relate to the project that we're working on. But as we started with, I do just want to recognize that we really do want involvement from the states, and that was really the purpose of this webinar, was to kind of start exploring some of these items. So with that, we will likely be reaching out, if you don't reach out to us first, so that we can make sure that we look at running these models in your states and come together on some data analysis. So with that, I'll just go ahead and conclude, but I really am very grateful for everyone that showed up today. This was an amazing turnout that we did not expect, so I really appreciate that. And please, I will drop my email in the chat pod right now. Feel free to reach out. I have a concluding slide I was going to pop up there, but I'm worried with my internet that everything may crash down. So I'm just going to drop my email in there now. Feel free to reach out to me, and I can connect you with anyone on our project team. And as I've said before, this will be recorded. So once it does come out, I will send it out to everyone that registered for the Zoom session. And then you can feel free to pass that on to your colleagues as well, to hopefully stimulate additional conversation. So I don't know if anybody else from my team has anything else left to say, but as I said, just be really grateful for your time today.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.